A Chinese couple recently discovered that they were in the same photograph as teenagers, more than a decade before they even met. On the left is the facial reconstruction of a 9,000-year-old skeleton that was found in a cave in Cheddar, England. His DNA was tested and researchers found that a living relative was teaching history only a half-mile away from the site, linking back 300 generations. These identical strangers happened to sit next to each other on a flight. When Don Carcos fought in World War II, he was hit with shrapnel and blinded in his right eye. While working in a barn 64 years later, a horse headbutted him in the exact same spot. The man was thrown into the wall with force, but his vision was suddenly restored.
What in the multiverse is that? You meeting an identical stranger, which is exactly like you. Ditto copy. He's even wearing the same shirt. Are we actually living in the Matrix?
In 1952, Werner von Braun wrote a book called Project Mars about the first manned expedition to the Red Planet. The book imagined that human colonists on Mars would be led by a person named Elon. In 2013, a woman in Florida was waiting to buy Powerball tickets when she let an elderly lady go ahead of her in line. The 84-year-old lady ended up winning the $590 million jackpot. A Swedish woman lost her wedding ring in her garden until she found it 16 years later growing on a carrot. In 2001, the Taliban used dynamite to demolish this 4th century Buddha statue that was carved in Afghanistan. While initially devastating, it was found that the explosions had revealed 50 caves that were untouched for 1,600 years. Inside the caves, researchers uncovered some ancient Buddhist relics, including the oldest oil paintings in the world.
Imagine that grandma telling her grandchildren how she won the lottery.
Hall of Fame boxer Sugar Ray Robinson once had a dream where he killed his next opponent in the ring. Afraid that his dream was telling him something, he initially backed out of his next fight until a priest convinced him otherwise. He ended up scoring a decisive knockout in the 8th round that resulted in the death of his opponent, Jimmy Doyle. A Russian woman once caught her fiancé cheating on her when she saw him with another woman on Google Street View. In 2015, a man found a Mountain Dew bottle from 1992 that would have won him a brand new Super Nintendo. Jim Springer and Jim Lewis are identical twins who were separated at birth but ended up living nearly identical lives. Both married a woman named Linda, got divorced, and remarried a woman named Betty. They also both had a dog named Toy, drove a Chevy, and smoked Salem cigarettes. All of this was discovered when they were reunited at the age of 39.
These two guys made it to my list of mother of all coincidences.
An Australian man named Bill Morgan was once declared dead for 14 minutes but somehow survived. To celebrate his survival, he bought some scratch-offs and won a car. When the news asked him to reenact the moment, he bought another scratch-off for the cameras and won a $250K jackpot. This person was saved from a $300 fine thanks to this absolute bro of a bird blocking their license plate from the camera. This same injured whale was photographed 35 years apart off the coast of Mexico. A man named Walter Summerford was struck by lightning 3 times throughout his life. After his death, his grave was also struck. In 2018, a woman from Canada was shot in the chest from point blank. But miraculously, her breast implant deflected the bullet and her only injury was a fractured rib.
Imagine waking up from the dead and winning 2 lotteries in a row.
In an episode of Johnny Bravo, there's a poster of a building on fire with the words "Coming Soon." This episode aired in April of 2001, just 5 months before 9/11. Narnia the Two-Faced Cat recently gave birth to 2 kittens of each color. In 1981, a South African astronomer gave a lecture on how death could happen at any time. At the end of the lecture, he popped the peppermint candy into his mouth and promptly choked to death. A man from Washington State found a caterpillar that looks like it has the face of Edgar Allan Poe on its back. These 2 nurses were hired within months of each other to work the same shift at the same Florida hospital. They soon discovered that they were long-lost sisters from Korea who had been separated for nearly 40 years. In August of 2000, the band Dream Theater recorded a live studio album called Live Scenes from New York. The album cover art features the skyline of New York City on fire, and the craziest part is that it was released on September 11, 2001. This 3,000-year-old sculpture of an Egyptian princess looks exactly like Michael Jackson. After a family lost their dog during Hurricane Sandy, they decided to give up and find a new one 2 years later. So they went to the local shelter, and the first animal the counselor showed them was their missing dog. This faulty 5 Below sign still says the same thing. In 1974, a mother dying from cancer gave a special ring to her son, but he lost it in a river 2 weeks later. After 39 years passed, a diver found the ring underwater and returned it to the man, who was in the hospital dying from cancer.
Oh yes, 9/11 wasn't an actual inside job.
In late 1864, the brother of John Wilkes Booth was boarding a train when he noticed a man was about to be crushed by the car. So he quickly grabbed the man by the collar and pulled him to safety. The man he'd saved was Robert Lincoln, the son of the president who would be assassinated by John Wilkes Booth just months later. In 1903, a pair of nearly identical strangers named Will West and William West ended up in the same Kansas prison. This case was a big part of the reason why fingerprints are now used for identification. In 2019, a young man named Tyler Moon was running in a Minneapolis marathon when he suddenly collapsed. Thankfully, he was wearing a Jesus Saves running bib since the man behind him was a nurse who performed CPR and saved his life. The nurse's first name was Jesus.
Well, we should thank these two gentlemen for all of the fingerprints verification. I mean, it's not good news for the bad guys.
A woman snorkeling near Australia noticed this fish was wearing a gold wedding ring. She says she tried to catch it, but it swam away too quickly. A woman from Michigan gave birth on 8808, 9909, and 101010. The odds of this happening were 50 million to 1. A man was photographing a plane crossing over a rainbow when it was struck by lightning at the exact same time. This little girl was born with the exact same white patch of hair as her mother. In 2009, a man was kidnapped in Mexico immediately after giving a lecture on how not to be kidnapped in Mexico. In 1970, a dead sperm whale was blown up with dynamite and chunks of its flesh were launched up to 700 feet away. One of the pieces destroyed a brand new car that was purchased during a promotion called Get a Whale of a Deal.
It is like example of those YouTube tutorials which shows you how to get views and their own video have a couple of views.
An Indonesian man became an instant millionaire when a meteorite worth $2 million crashed into his home. The rock is an extremely rare variety that is estimated to be around 4.5 billion years old. Vinny the chestnut horse was born with a perfect white shadow of his own body. A married couple was photographed at the exact same time and place in Disney World 15 years before they even met. They weren't even living in the same country when the photo was taken. A dog from Indiana shot his owner in the foot with a shotgun. The name of the dog was Trigger. In 1784, a Japanese seaman sent a message in a bottle saying that his ship had wrecked. 150 years later, it washed up in the village where he was born. Frayne Selak narrowly survived a fatal train crash, plane crash, 2 car explosions, and being hit by a bus. He then went on to win $1 million in the lottery.
I guess being overnight successful isn't a myth after all.
10-year-old Tilly Smith saved her family and 100 other tourists from the 2004 Asian tsunami that killed over 200,000 people. She was able to recognize the early signs of tsunamis that she learned in geography class just 2 weeks prior. Anne Hathaway's husband bears a strong resemblance to William Shakespeare. Not to mention the name of Shakespeare's wife was Anne Hathaway. Roy Sullivan holds a record that will hopefully never be broken. He was struck by lightning not once, not twice, but 7 times. Bruce Lee once played an actor who was killed by a prop gun. Years later, his son died in real life the exact same way. When there was a drought in Bhopal, India, local priests married 2 frogs to please the gods of rain. Sadly, the frogs had to be divorced 2 months later due to the persistent rainfall that destroyed over 9,000 homes.
Oh, it's been so long that the rain hasn't happened. What should we actually do? Oh, let's marry 2 frogs. That's a good idea.
A man from New Jersey bought a $5 bottle of orange juice from ShopRite, which his wife made him return because it was too expensive. He then decided to buy 2 Powerball tickets with the refunded money and ended up winning the $300 million jackpot. This person caught the same exact fish a month and a half later. Harry John Patch was the last surviving soldier from World War I and was briefly the oldest man in Europe. He died at the age of 111 years, 1 month, 1 week, and 1 day. Tom Cruise divorced all 3 of his ex-wives when they turned 33, and each is 11 years younger than the last. The first person to die during the construction of the Hoover Dam was J.G. Tierney on December 20th, 1922. On the same exact day, 14 years later, the last person died. It was J.G. Tierney's son, Patrick.
Can you guys guess what Tom Cruise and Leonardo DiCaprio have in common? Well, you guessed it right.
In 2004, a man was hiking in the Andes Mountains when he found a wallet in the area where a plane crashed in 1972. Upon realizing it belonged to one of the 16 survivors, he returned it to him 32 years later. On January 8, 1942, Stephen Hawking was born on the 300th anniversary of Galileo's death. 76 years later, he died on Pi Day, which also happened to be Einstein's 139th birthday. A New York City pigeon pooped this portrait of itself on a leaf. Cristiano Ronaldo is 869 days older than Lionel Messi. Cristiano Ronaldo Jr. is also 869 days older than Thiago Messi. In 1977, a Spanish woman decided not to reboard her flight and instead stayed at the layover location even though this was against the rules. She ended up being the sole survivor of a collision that killed 583 people, the deadliest crash in aviation history.
Her spidey senses were tingling.
In 2010, an amateur treasure hunter from England let his 3-year-old son borrow his metal detector for the first time. Within minutes, he discovered a 500-year-old gold pendant worth $4 million. A dog gave birth to 3 puppies, each with their own corresponding number on their back. There was only one photo ever taken of Abraham Lincoln giving a speech, and his killer John Wilkes Booth is in it. On December 31st, little Delaney turned 1-year-old while her great-great-grandmother turned 101. They were born exactly a century apart. These 2 bullets collided during the Battle of Gallipoli in 1916. For 300 years, the lonely tree of Tenere was the only tree within a 100-mile radius in the Sahara Desert. That was until it was accidentally knocked down in 1973 by a drunk driver.
The chance of that happening is 1 in a billion. Well, that's an interesting fact.
When a Filipino fisherman's anchor got stuck on a rock, he decided to take it home with him as a good luck charm. He kept it under his bed for 10 years until his house burned down in a fire. He soon found out that it was actually the largest pearl ever found, valued at right around $100 million. This man painted a girl inspired by his imagination, and when he met someone who looked exactly like her, he married her. In July of this year, marine biologists spotted a real-life yellow sponge and pink sea star near a mountain in the Atlantic. A Brazilian police officer was saved when the Nokia in his back pocket stopped a bullet that was fired at him. In 1915, a distraught woman who was late to her sister's funeral demanded to see her one last time. So the coffin was raised out of the ground, and when it was opened, the dead woman sat up and smiled. She went on to live for another 47 years.
Well, this guy's a pure genius. His plan worked after all.
In 1954, Ann Hodges was hit with a softball-sized meteorite while taking a nap in her Alabama home. She remains the only known human to ever be hit by a meteorite. Troy Leon Gregg was sentenced to death for killing 3 men in Georgia in 1976. On the night before his execution, he managed to escape, only to be killed in a bar fight that same night. On July 4, 1826, President John Adams' last words before passing were "Thomas Jefferson survives." Little did he know, President Jefferson had died just a few hours earlier that same day.
Well, this guy escaped the Grim Reaper in the first place, but not the second one.
The most siblings born on the same day but on different years is 5. Catherine, Carol, Charles, Claudia, and Cecilia Cummins were all born on February 20th. The odds of this happening are about 17 billion to 1. In 2007, the Coble family lost their 2 girls and 1 boy in a horrific car crash. But a year later, the mother gave birth to triplets, 2 girls and 1 boy. Mark Twain was born in 1835, shortly after Halley's Comet was passing by Earth. In 1909, he would later say, "I came in with Halley's Comet and I expect to go out with it." He died on the exact day the comet appeared in 1910. In 1957, a woman attending an MLB game was hit with a foul ball that broke her nose. The game was briefly paused, then resumed once the woman was put on a stretcher. But as they carried her away, the next pitch was fouled off and hit the same woman, breaking a bone in her knee. In 1998, Honduras built a bridge over the Choluteca River, but the water was rerouted by Hurricane Mitch that same year. This 3,000-year-old sculpture of an Egyptian princess looks exactly like Michael Jackson. Spider-Man grew up at 20 Ingram Street in Queens, New York. The address exists in real life, and the family that lives there happens to be the Parkers. Lauren Kreitzer was broke, depressed, and disabled after losing his leg in a car accident in 2007. But one day he saw a blanket valued at $500,000 on Antiques Roadshow and realized he had the exact same blanket. It was a Navajo blanket from the 1800s that he ended up selling for $1.5 million and quickly turned his life around. During World War I, a 17-year-old British soldier's life was saved when his pocket Bible stopped a bullet. The book has been passed down through his family and still has the bullet embedded inside. In 1977, the University of Evansville men's basketball team was involved in a tragic plane crash. The crash killed everyone on the team except for one player who didn't make the trip due to an illness. 2 weeks later, that player was killed in a car crash. David Hull was digging for gold in 2015 when he came across a rock that he was certain had gold inside. But after years of failing to crack the rock open, he decided to get it checked out by an expert, and it ended up being something much more rare than gold. Turns out it was an iron meteorite estimated to be 4.6 billion years old. This woman adopted an elderly dog because it looked exactly like the dog she had as a child that her parents told her ran away. A microchip scan then confirmed that it was in fact her old dog. Someone felt safe leaving their sunroof open inside until a pipe busted open above their car. In 1999, Richard Anthony Jones was convicted of a felony even though he had a strong alibi. He spent 17 years in prison until authorities found his doppelganger living in the same town with the same first name.
And here, we have two guys who made it to the list of mother of all coincidences.
Michael Jackson had a meeting scheduled at the top of one of the Twin Towers on 9/11. But he was up until 3 the night before chatting with his mom on the phone, and he ended up sleeping through the appointment. Mohammed Bashir from Dubai bought a lottery ticket just before boarding an Emirates flight that crashed. But the man survived and proceeded to win $1 million from the ticket. Perfect solar eclipses are only possible thanks to an insane coincidence. The sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, but also 400 times farther from Earth, making them appear exactly the same size in the sky. A British Marine had the motto "You'll never walk alone" tattooed on his leg before part of it was amputated in Afghanistan. As a result, some of his tattoo got cut off and now reads "You'll never walk."
Definitely was a Liverpool fan.